Before that, I taught theology at Loyola University for 20 years, and then I worked as a chaplain, live-in chaplain of a nursing home, Catholic nursing home, for 6 years, and then I came to Jesuit Hall. And before all that, I don't even want to mention what happened. So I'm very happy to come and talk to you about Lent, especially, I guess, an Eastern approach, Byzantine approach to Lent, because I think it's very lovely and it's fun to talk about. So, could you? We all know who you are, but even so.
It's okay. I'm Judy Buncher. I'm Father Stark's assistant in mission and ministry. And I've been with the university 4.5 years. So I have 4 children. How much do you want to know?
That's enough. That's enough. What's your favorite color?
Okay.
And Richard Bueller at Jesuit Hall.
I'm Father Stark, and Vice President for Mission and Ministry.
And I'm Joyce Williams, a Dominican sister. I've been with the university about 12 years. And this is a nice prelude to, I'm going to be a hermit down in Peebly this weekend. And so
Oh, wonderful.
This will get me kind of in the mood and disposition for a good weekend.
Sister, what brand of Dominican are you?
Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Grand Rapids, so you know. Yeah. Okay.
I'm Steve Tinge. I'm in research compliance, animal care, and I've been with the university for 5 years.
Okay. Well, let me give out these. Oh, Jack.
I'm getting it from both sides.
Jack. Well, what can I ever do to help? Well, I was focusing on this gentleman and I didn't think of you.
You see me out of the corner of your eye, right?
Yeah.
Well, my name's Jack Hunthausen, and I'm semi-retired, living at Jesuit Hall. And my main claim to fame is that I had the privilege of going 4 years St. Lucia University High School in the same class with Carl. And then we came down here to the university together, and different areas. And we went to theology together up in Toronto, and we were ordained 44 years in June together out here at the cathedral. And other than that, I just hope to stay awake.
So it's the same old story. Let me give you these blue things. I thought we could read some of these as an opening prayer, and I also thought that if I gave them out and we didn't read them, then you would read them while I was talking. So I thought we better, because they're very attractive.
Cover all your bases, Carl.
Okay, so let's just look at this first one. I'll read it, but follow along. The springtime of the fast has dawned. The flower of repentance has begun to open. Brothers and sisters, let us cleanse ourselves of all impurity and sing to the giver of light, glory to you, who alone love the human race. Now these Byzantine things are, they're heavily monastic, and they can seem heady or perhaps excessively devotional, but this is a lovely one that's very concrete about the meaning of the fasting during Lent, which in these texts is going to be called the fast. It means Lent. While fasting with the body, brothers and sisters, let us also fast in spirit. Let us loose every bond of iniquity. Let us undo the knots of every contract made by violence. Let us tear up all unjust agreements. Let us give bread to the hungry, and welcome to our house the poor who have no roof to cover them, that we may receive great mercy from Christ our God. Then, this one about paradise, we could read this at the beginning of the paradise half, but we'll read it here, because I got other ones on paradise. Oh, paradise, garden of beauty and delight, dwelling place made perfect by God, unending gladness and eternal joy, the hope of the prophets and the home of the saints. By the music of your rustling leaves, beseech the Creator of all to open to me the gates my sins have closed, that I may partake of the tree of life and grace, which was given to me in the beginning. All mortal life is but one day, so it is said, to those who labor with love. There are 40 days in the fast. Let us keep them all with joy. And then this lovely prayer of St. Ephrem. In the Byzantine churches, you know, they say this a lot every day, and every time they do, they prostrate themselves. But we'll just say it once and sitting down. But it's a great prayer. O Lord and Master of my life, take from me the spirit of discouragement and laziness, of craving for power and idle talk. Give me instead the spirit of good judgment and humility, of patience and love. Let me see my own faults and not condemn my brothers and sisters, for you are blessed forever and ever. Lent means spring, and there are many ways in which you could think of Lent as spring, but I'm just going to talk about two. One is intrinsic. It has to do with the accurate, lengthy history of the season of Lent and its meaning. And the other one is metaphorical. It's monastic, poetic, but perhaps more attractive and maybe more possible than the original meaning. I remember when I was a kid, I used to go on Saturday nights to visit a little friend of mine who, like me, was kind of a wallflower. And we would watch old movies on TV. Now, I'm talking about like 1952. This was already an old movie then, you know. And I still remember, well, obviously I remember it. There was like a square of a New England village, you know, there's the courthouse, and there's a lawyer's office, and there's a grocery store, and there's a shoe shop, and there's a soda fountain, you know. And all these people, the ladies are walking along talking and shopping. The children are acting crazy, you know. Kids bouncing balls, girls with moving these wheels with hoops and all that, you know. A good-looking guy in a soda fountain, all the girls gathering around. And then the camera fastened in behind the ear of this guy. And there was like a little electrode back there. And there was a little brass screw, and there was a little wire, you know. And then it fastened on somebody else, a kid playing, and then one of the ladies, and you gradually understood. Some of these people were either aliens or they had been taken over by aliens. And they would be controlled through this thing, you know. It was a thing like you could buy in the drugstore. It was not high tech at all, but the meaning was perfectly clear. Well, if I could equip you with such a device and I was able to talk into it, I would fix it so that whenever you heard the word Lent, what would come through would be baptism, because the deepest, most serviceable, honest meaning of Lent is it's a season of preparation for baptism. It's not primitive as these things go. I mean, Easter goes back to the beginning. We're talking about something that was getting framed up, say, in the 4th century. Mentioned, they say, at the Council of Nicaea, but just by name. Some places apparently had like a fast every other week for a while, you know. Originally not 40 days in length, really no sign of any notion of being like the fast of Jesus in the desert. They just picked a pretty good period before Easter, which they did in different ways. Sometimes it was at the end of the 50-day period following the 2nd of February, Epiphany being a baptismal day. So when all that's over, there's another round of baptism, and that's the baptism that we celebrate in our Lent today. And then gradually people were smart enough to realize that this was like 40 days. And so it was kind of like what Jesus did when he went into the desert to be tempted. And then they began trying to figure out how it was 40 days. But if you look into this, you'll discover that in all the rites of the church, Lent is different lengths, and none of them can get 40 days out of it. They try. But maybe they got to leave out. Well, everybody leaves out Sunday. Sometimes they leave out Saturday. That makes it a little longer. In the West, they used to begin on the first Monday of Lent, day after this first Sunday of Lent. But then they counted and they said, well, there aren't 40 days. So they added 3, beginning with Ash Wednesday. But anyway, what Lent is about is the preparation for baptism. This is absolutely essential and absolutely intrinsic, but it's not too apparent today because the time when adults were baptized has, it's been a millennium and a half since that was a living reality, at least in the part of the church that we represent. I am told that, like in Africa, you will still have the bishop baptizing people for maybe a half hour, sprinkling them with water from, abundantly, with water from a palm leaf, because there are too many to baptize at one time. Well, you could see that would be a pretty exhilarating experience. We are down now in most parishes to just maybe no baptisms at all, or maybe a few. And then other people who are coming into the church very appropriately. But that sense of the springtime of the church, that is to say, the dead human race coming to life concretely in our midst by new members, people we can see and associate, and we welcome joining the church, that's something that is well, we have a hint of, but it's not something, generally speaking, that we experience directly. Maybe if you work in the RCIA, or if you're a priest who's involved in actually baptizing, you have a sense of that. And it's true that in most places, I guess today, there will be scrutinies on the middle Sundays of Lent, and it's a little kind of a jewel in the middle of the Sunday liturgy. It's not full-throated, but it's the essence. And what we would like to happen as time goes on is that more and more in the life of the church, this basic meaning of Lent, that it is a season for preparation for baptism, which the church invented on her own. You remember in Acts how these pagans were like, say, the eunuch of the Queen of the South, he was riding in his chariot. He spent how much time with Philip the deacon? An hour. And after that, they went down into the slush by the side of the road, and he was baptized. That's the way they did it. But they were smart enough to see that wasn't a very good way to baptize, because you could baptize Jews who knew all about Yahweh and everything else, identifying Jesus as Messiah and Lord. But when you try to do that with Gentiles, it didn't work too well. They really didn't know what was going on. So they began to demand preparation. Typically, we are told a 3-year course of preparation. But the period of intense recollection or something at the end of it, the 40-day period of Lent. So what we would do with this, well, let me say as a practical thing, as somebody who for some years has tried to heighten this awareness of Lent in practice, like in a Sunday community, say, people in a parish, or when I used to work in the nursing home, or when I worked at Loyola in campus ministry part-time, and I was, a coordinator of Mass, and I was convinced that this ought to be done, and by golly, every time we opened our mouth, we talked about this all during the season of Lent, and we really leaned on the scrutinies and all that sort of thing. But it falls flat because we don't have celebrational materials that go with that, and we don't have any memory. It's easy to find things on the Passion, which is the third stage of the development of Lent. And almost all our hymns and things are about penance, which is left over from the catechumenate when they didn't have any catechumens for a reason that strikes me anyway, as funny. But of course, it didn't strike them as funny. They kept catechumenal movements, but they attached them to the regular body of the faithful. So you have this awful, heavy, negative, hopeless sense of Lent, which is doing catechumenal things without any catechumens, you know. It's hard to do because we don't have the celebrational operators. Like, it's hard to find a hymn on this. There are some. And it's hard to find music directors who will buy into this unless they're driven to the keyboard. You have to make a whip of ropes and make them play this stuff, you know. And then it's all unfamiliar and people don't get it very well. So renewing a public celebration of Lent as a preparation for Easter is quite a thing, but still I think it's worthwhile, and I would, if I were in a position to do that again, I would certainly lean on it, expecting though that I would not be too successful. When I was in the nursing home, I promoted the idea of a really nice baptismal font. We used to have a little tiny one in the oldies, you know, they love holy water. And they would get range of motion going after that holy water that the physical therapy department couldn't even conceive of. So I said, well, they love the holy water, let's have a real nice font. Well, yes. So designs, you know, building the thing, installing the thing, blessing the thing, you know, flowers all around. And the next day I came into the chapel and all the flowers were gone. They were around the altar. And I said, you know, when you're dealing with sacristans, you always do it in the third person. So I didn't say, what have you done with the flowers? I said, what have they done with the flowers? And she said, well, they were all around the baptismal font. I put them around the altar, obviously. Why would you have flowers around the font? And one day I had to put about half a gallon of water in it circulated, waste no water, you know, half a gallon of water in because it would evaporate. And I'm going down with my sprinkling can, and I meet one of the young sisters. And she said, are you going to water the flowers? I said, no, this is for the font. She said, oh, it's for your font. This is a crazy guy who is obsessed by fonts. So naturally, he's watering his font. It's hard to get through. Now, there are ways that we can, in practice, individually, not as managers of parishes or communities, be more aware of this. One is by entering into the RCAI events wholeheartedly, not scraping our feet, spitting on the floor and all that, but really trying to sympathize with this growth of the church and trying to imagine, if it's not actual, a relationship with those people who in mysterious ways, or maybe not so mysterious ways. I am told that most catechumens in the Catholic Church in the United States are the result of marriage. But anyway, for one reason or another, these people decide in kind of a sweet innocence to join the Roman Catholic Church. And it's nice to think about that. And to, it's not like you're imagining a figure in the gospel. You're imagining a figure who's right before you. The big events that will be in most places will be the scrutinies, which are very, very rich, lay it on the line, very lyrical, but zip, zip, and they're gone. Another thing is, during Lent, to pray for candidates. Our local candidates, I mean in an explicit way, referring to them in our prayers, having, as we say, intentions about them, not just those in our own community, but also ones around the world. And I like to think about ones in, you would say, non-Christian cultures who are often at great personal cost coming to be members of the church. Pray for them and pray for the people who help them, their pastors and catechists and managers of the RCIA, sponsors, and so on. Another thing we can do is note the immense effort that our church in the United States has taken, and to a degree still takes, to grow the faith of children. I mean, the Roman Catholic enterprise in elementary education is it's unparalleled in the history of the church, and what it has to do with in a situation where people were baptized as infants, and not too many of them would be baptized as adults. And those of you who are old enough will remember that that was done on the sly. I mean, an adult was not, you didn't go to church and see an adult baptized. That was done, late in the evening. Afterwards, have a few drinks with the pastor and then go out for dinner. This was not a big religious event at all. It was sneaking it in because if you were an adult, you really should be baptized already. Somewhere along the line there was a flaw, Well, in a way that people were not aware of, we made up for that in the American church by really nourishing the faith of youngsters who had been baptized. Just as in the primitive church, they invented Lent to take care of preparing children for preparing Gentiles to be baptized, so in our time, 19th century, Catholic Church began having these grade schools, and finally they became almost universal wherever possible. And what was the purpose of it? Well, it was to grow the faith of the children. Very successfully, as you know. Many other things successful as well. So that's the first half. That's about Lent as a baptismal season. It's full of ideals, and full of good history, but to actually observe it is a stretch. Are there any comments about that or questions anyone has? Okay. Well, then, the second part I like better, really, and it's about Lent, as a return to Eden, of the ways that I know to deal with quote-unquote negative sides of Lent, like penitential behavior of one kind or another, fasting, long prayers, staying awake, all that stuff. This is the best way to do it. And it grew out of a monastic context in the Eastern Church, especially in the Byzantine Church, where you would expect that creative people who were just really getting into Lent would try to find some meaning, and they did. And one of the meanings that you find a lot in the hymnography of the Byzantine Church is Lent as a return to paradise. This is an outside interpretation. I'm not too sure that you're going to find too many texts in the Scripture. There may be some, like in the wisdom literature, but I'm not aware of them. This is not scriptural. This is something that was added. Well, I mean, the part about the fall is scriptural and all that, but observing that as a Lent, that's something that they made up. It's metaphorical. It's added over the top. But boy, does it give positive meaning. It transforms those observances. It's not spatial. We're not talking about going back, obviously, to Eden, but rather we're presenting penitential themes in an attractive and hopeful context. I said a little bit before we started about the Eden alternative. When I was learning to be a minister in a nursing home, I spent a semester at the medical school learning about geriatrics in a special program for people who were professionals in an area but who wanted to find out how geriatrics would mesh with it. It was a nice program, and I don't regret that at all. But one of the things we did was investigate a plan, which is still, I Googled it last night, it's still in effect. How widely in effect it is, I don't know, called the Eden Alternative. And that meant that you try to put the old people in a non-clinical environment. Not too many blood pressure takers around, and not too many lifts and so on. They are necessary, but they're out of the way. Otherwise, you try to make it like a more, standard human environment. And then you intensify that by bringing in plants and especially animals, also children, if you can. And as I said at the beginning, this is very attractive to people until they try to do it. Because, of course, you've got to take care of the animals, you've got to corral the children and all that. You have to take the lifts and the ice out of the closet. Or if you just relax and let all that out and you don't do any of that, life is much easier for you. But, of course, life for the oldies is less pleasant than it would otherwise be. And I can tell you, I had my own personal Eden alternative with my little dog, who was heroic and wonderful, as anyone who knew him will tell you. And I really believe, I'm not being cute here, I believe this is true, he was much more effective in his ministry than I was in mine. Because I would come along, lumping along the corridor, kind of blinky and confused and all that. And he was full of life, dashing around, crazy to see people. It was like he never saw an old lady before. He was on her, oh my goodness, he was so happy. And they would respond. I used to go to the home even on my day off, but I wore green pants rather than my usual black pants. I was walking down the corridor with the dog, of course, and there were two old ladies in their wheelchairs talking. And one said, that guy is tall just the way the priest is. And the other one says, yes, and he's got the same kind of little dog. So they, it humanized them a lot. It humanized them. Now, that's the way, that Eden alternative, we'd like to apply that spirit to our understanding of Lent. What is the character of the Eden or the paradise that we're talking about? Well, it's an environment, or you could say a home, created by God specifically for human beings, the Garden of Eden. It's a garden enclosed, they always say. That means that you're protected in there. Your life is enhanced. Things growing in the garden aren't just trees in it. They're special. They're cultivated. They're planted. They're planted and all that sort of thing. And you're safe in there, but it's not a tough military type of defense. It's not a wall with a broken glass on the top. It's just kind of an understanding that this is a very special, lovely place where you will be most at home. It's beautiful. See, that's a category that we don't really use very much in our religious life. I mean, boy, do I read this stuff. It's coming in on the internet. The Jesuits now have, every day, we get like 2 screens full of things about praying and all that. And there are beautiful implications to it, but the theme of beauty directly does not really occur. I mean, when you could talk to Roman Catholics coming out of Mass during Lent a lot, and even if it was beautiful, probably they wouldn't think that that was worth mentioning. It's not an operative category in our thoughts about religion, generally speaking. But if you're talking about Eden, well, it's supposed to be a beautiful garden. It's fruitful and nourishing. It's not just to be looked at, but it's something that you feed on. It's something that gives you life. It's something that you can, it's like it was, just doing what it's doing, but it's doing it for you. What a wonderful place. There in Eden, humans have peaceful dominion. There's no fighting for control. Nobody's trying to be the manager. Nobody's trying to be the boss. The human beings are just living there in harmony, and they're in harmony with the rest of creation. they're one of the legends of St. Anthony of the desert. Not the first hermit, but the first big hermit, you know. St. Anthony started living apparently kind of in a hovel at the edge of town. And then, as time went on, he went to another hermitage more out in the sticks. And then he went to the desert, and he stayed there for a long, long time. Well, people then were interested in heroic physical penances, and they loved nothing better than to be somebody who would, for example, have flaps of skin around the lower part of the body. You have to imagine it in me, which was a sign that they had been fasting a lot, you know. So you know how people are. It became kind of an ideal, I guess, and they went out to hang around to wait until finally Anthony came out of the cave. Because they thought, he's really going to be something. There we're going to see an ascetic. He's going to be skinny and wiry and sick-looking, and his skin is going to be hanging on him and all that. And then one day, he came out. And he looked like $1 million. His complexion was tawny, like he had spent months in the sun, but he had been in the cave. And he didn't have skin flapping on him. He was filled out. He was a well-built, handsome man. And he didn't stop to talk to them. The first thing he started to do was plant a garden. And the wolves came from out of the desert, and they dug up, you know, he didn't have to plow. And the birdies came bringing seeds and put them in, and then the wolves covered them up and so on. Well, he was making the Garden of Eden. They didn't understand what Anthony was about when he was doing all this fasting and everything. But they saw when he not only made a garden, but he made it with the help of the animals. There was harmony in creation there. In Eden, people had natural, easy intimacy with God. You think about walking around in the cool of the evening, how God would come around in the evening and chat with Adam and Eve. That part about they ate the forbidden fruit and so on, and then they were naked. And they said, well, we didn't want to hang around with you because we're naked. And he said, who told you were naked? Who made you so smart? They were on easy terms with God. You think about the Old Testament. You know how, boy, oh boy, when Moses talked to God, it was transforming, and it was dangerous. I mean, touch the mountain and you're dead. Now their vision of God at the beginning was he was just there. You'd almost have to say, he was human. He walked around with the human beings. They could talk to him. His presence was gentle, sweet, predictable. That's the way it is in Eden. Now, all this is lost to human beings because of sin. Now, the sin of Adam, of course, but if that gives you difficulty, well, then our sin. None of us is sinless. And we all, the better we know ourselves, we realize that in a certain way we're always working. It's almost as though we're slaving away to get out of Eden, So it may be that in the book Adam and Eve are the sinful ones, but we all buy into that sinfulness in our own lives. We all disobey God one way or another, as they did in the garden. We use material creation selfishly. Maybe I should say we misuse it. And the sign of that is that they ate this forbidden fruit. They made use of it in an inappropriate way. They gobbled it down. Wonderful figure. They attempted to become godlike without reference to God. Only one God. If you want to be like God, like the serpent promised them that they would be, then of course you should ask God, because you're going to be like him. But they had this idea that they could be somehow independent. Well, all these things are present in our lives today. We don't have to read the book of Genesis to discover them. When we read the book of Genesis, we identify this in our own lives. The Christian life is reestablishing the experience of Eden. It involves, and this is what one would like to do during Lent, realizing that our world is God's gift. That is not too common with us culturally. We're very willing to thank God for things that are good. Success in school or in a profession, good health, nice relationships within a family. Well, that's all wonderful. But the whole world is God's gift. It's not, you pick out some things that are really, really grateful for. Don't mention the others. When I give a penance, which has to do with Thanksgiving, I always ask the penitent, look, can you do this? Because I know from experience that some confessors will ask ask a spouse to pray for another spouse. Then they come to me and they say, you told me to pray for her, but I can't do it. I just can't. I'm sorry. It's a great idea. So, it's realizing that everything is God's gift. Also, of course, ourselves. It's welcoming, comforting, rather than dangerous and demanding. This means not just in our imagination we do this, we interpret things in a nice way. It means that by our efforts we try to make the world welcoming and comforting to the human beings who are around us. The attitude of Eden dwellers is one of habitual obedience to God's gentle will. It's not, will or I won't I, it's maybe I might slip up or maybe I'll change my mind, but in general, what I perceive to be God's will for me, well, that's what I'm going to do. It can be difficult, but generally speaking, it works out pretty well. That's the insight of the Eden dweller. People who dwell in Eden make a realistic attempt to withstand the human tendency to take over things, ravage them, devour them. It's only recently that it has occurred to us that the world of nature is not ours to destroy, and that's only because it's necessary. That it would be a very rare insight until rather recently that people would say, don't cut down that tree, that's a good-looking tree, that's a beautiful tree. The tendency would be to say, well, it's my tree, I can do with it whatever I want. This tree is in my way, it's coming down, I need to build a fire with this tree, it's mine. See, that is a mentality which is totally in opposition to that of somebody who wants to live in paradise. Eden dwellers emphasize cooperative effort rather than control by some. The Pope, dances around on the top of this idea, and the world is shocked to think that this guy who is an absolute monarch of a country and, what is more important, a whole religion, and he's trying to share it. What is this? This is absolutely unheard of. Well, to that extent, he's an Eden dweller. People who live in Eden try to cultivate the symbols of Eden. Now, they're symbols, but they work pretty well, like a garden, for example, or if not a garden, then some plants, in your room. You can come into relationship with them. I've had plants in my room simply because people give them to me, and I don't want them to come back and find that the plant has been flushed down the toilet. So I keep watering them and all that, but as time goes on, I now, I kind of check every day to see how they're growing and making, conclusions about that. That's a good way to get a sense of what Eden is. And then, of course, good relations with animals. It's easy for us in Jesuit Hall because we can look out the window and see the dog park, But in general, not looking upon squirrels and rats as vermin and so on, but as sort of as little friends, maybe somewhat annoying and all that. It's converting. It's taking account of beauty and simplicity, valuing them and planning for them. concretely, like setting up a house so that it's simple living, planning a meal so that it's not the most elaborate, but in a certain sense, the least elaborate. Eden dwellers are on familiar terms with God and are aware of His presence everywhere and always. They try to make themselves more aware. They are very reverent when, as you might say, they come into God's presence. But they know at a deeper level that God is always present to them, and that reverence is always appropriate. They have privileged, unpretentious moments of communion with God, like, for example, in the story of Genesis, in the cool of the evening. So we're faced with Lent, which has practices that involve, it's conversion, doing things we wouldn't ordinarily do. And one way to achieve that, which is very beautiful, and I can tell you can be functional, is to realize that the Lenten journey of the Christian is a journey back into Eden. It's not automatic. It's something that we cooperate with so that the world we live in and the world we relate in is like the world that God gave to the human beings at the very beginning. Now I have some Lent as Return to Paradise sheets here. We can read a couple of these. Some of them are kind of, challenging. Let's look at the first one. The sun hid its rays. The moon and stars were turned to blood. The mountains were afraid. The hills trembled when paradise was shut. Adam departed, beating his hands upon his face and saying, I am fallen. Merciful Lord, have mercy on me. The last one on the other side, the other page there, Adam was cast out of paradise. I like that one because it has an intrinsic part of it is the end, which is full of hope and promise. Adam was cast out of paradise through eating from the tree. Seated before the gates he wept, lamenting with a pitiful voice and saying, What have I suffered in my misery? I transgressed one commandment of my master, and now I am deprived of every blessing. O most holy paradise, planted for my sake and shut because of my sin, pray to him that made you and fashioned me, that once more I may take pleasure in your flowers. Then the Savior said to him, I desire not the loss of the creature which I have fashioned, but that he should be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And when he comes to me, I will not cast him out. And then the very last one on the other side at the bottom, a little four-liner, but it's very beautiful. Holy Lady, who have opened to all the faithful the gates of paradise, that Adam closed of old through his transgression. Open to me now the gates of mercy. Are there any comments on the first half or the second half? You have?
Lovely, it just gives a whole different attitude about Lent.
Oh, it sure does. Yep. Yeah. Anyone else?
You had said, Father, at the beginning that there's a highly monastic character to the Eastern writings that you were using, especially from Ephraim the Syrian. And I'm thinking of somebody like Bernard of Clairvaux, who talks about the monastic life as a return to the hortus claustralis, the cloister garden.
Yeah.
And which would connect the sort of penitential flavor of early monasticism with the Lenten context that you're describing.
Yeah, well, I mentioned a phrase here garden enclosed, which I think is the way they often translate that. And you would find the monastic life presented as cultivating a garden, actuated in the garden of the monastery, which would typically be completely surrounded by the monastery. It would be the focus in the middle of the monastery. I think that relating that to Lent is more characteristic of the Byzantine church than it is to the Western church. But the notion that the monastic life, which is, you know, like the Christian life, intense or compressed or something, is a return to a garden, living in a garden, cultivating a garden, enjoying a garden, right? Yeah.
I'm taking a class at Belden Lane is teaching this semester at Aquinas called Backpacking with the Saints. And his whole emphasis is on how is nature out there feeding my spirituality, and how do I use that? You want to talk about it as a garden, the garden, you know, the nature and all the. It has been just so tremendous, and this kind of just feeds into that.
Yeah. See, I think of myself, and then I guess of people that I know. We'd say, well, this is really nice, but let's get down to cases, you know. But there's nothing quite like being at peace in the physical world, you know. And that is not a mental thing. That's putting up with the animals, wanting to talk to them, wanting to see sunrises and sunsets, to you know, walk along the trail and all that. See, for us, I mean, stereotypically, not for you and me, of course, that has really nothing to do with religion. But I think it probably really has everything to do with it. Well, thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because I love to talk about Lent, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this, and I am glad that you came to share in it. You're welcome.